Enoch did not die. Every name in Genesis gets a lifespan, a grave, a final verse. Enoch gets 4 words, and he was not. That silence was supposed to stay closed, but the ancient texts that filled it did not describe a peaceful departure. They described a man taken upward, into fire, into crystal, into command, brought back for exactly 30 days, and then taken again. The second time he did not come back as himself. What returned wore his face, stood in his doorway, handed his sons books filled with knowledge no human mind was built to hold, and then vanished permanently. What replaced him was given a different name, Metatron, and it has not been human since. Chapter 1. The Man Who Came Back Wrong. Before the first descent, look at the world Enoch was living in. Not struggling, rotting. The kind of civilizational collapse that makes cruelty feel like structure and violence feel like order. Enoch walked through all of it without touching it. That made him invisible to the people around him, and unmistakably visible to something watching from above the sky. The texts do not describe him as being invited. He was taken. Ancient Enochic tradition does not imagine soft clouds opening to receive a righteous man. It describes separation. Abrupt, total, the way a sound cuts off in the middle of a word before you realize the silence has already started. He was removed from the earth, and what he entered was not any human idea of paradise. Imagine it exactly as Enoch describes: walls of crystal that produce light without a source, a floor that burns without consuming anything, a ceiling alive with lightning that does not flash randomly. It moves with intent. Cherubim move inside the architecture like thought passing through a mind too vast to measure. At the center, a throne, clear as crystal, terrible as judgment. Not beautiful, not warm, sovereign. The kind of presence that does not ask whether a human being is prepared. The determination has already been made. Now place yourself inside that. A mortal body, lungs expanding and contracting. A heartbeat that suddenly sounds very small, standing before a structure so total and so indifferent to your comfort that the space around you begins to feel like compression. Not wonder, exposure. Here is what most retellings of this moment get wrong. They call what Enoch felt awe. They call the throne room glorious, but awe is what you feel at a distance. What Enoch experienced is what happens when the distance collapses entirely, because he was not just shown the throne, he was shown what lies behind visible existence. Not poetry, not comfort, not promises, machinery. How light is assigned to the sky. How time is measured and divided. How judgment is recorded. How every living moment is already cataloged in a system of chambers and archives that runs without interruption, and has been running since before human language had a word for before. The horror is not that heaven exists. The horror is that heaven operates, with structure, with records, with hierarchy, with an intelligence so total that human life begins to feel small, observed, and already filed away. And Enoch, a mortal man, standing inside the machine, now had to go back. Chapter 2. 30 days until heaven returns. He returned to earth. That is the wound this story refuses to close. If Enoch had simply vanished on the first descent, the fear would remain theoretical, safe, abstract. But the ancient texts do something far more calculated than permanent disappearance. They give him back for exactly 30 days. Not as mercy, as procedure. Think about that first moment. The door opening, his children in the room, the shape of their father in the frame, recognizing the face and knowing immediately, before any thought arrives to explain it, that whatever is standing in the doorway has already moved somewhere too far away to follow. What does his voice sound like now, after hearing divine command echo through crystal chambers? What does a family do with someone who is already absent in every way that matters, and only physically present? Enoch is direct. He was told to set his affairs in order, to instruct his sons, to hand over the books, to speak while there was still time. That does not sound like a blessing. That sounds like a sentence being administered with perfect, unhurried calm by something that does not require your consent. Because he did not come back empty, he came back with books, pages dense with knowledge no human mind was built to hold. Records pressed into written form the way a wound is forced closed before it is ready to heal. Here is the part that no retelling emphasizes enough. He was not teaching his family. He was preparing them for his permanent removal from their lives. Every word he spoke carried the same message underneath it. I am not staying. I am not yours anymore. I am only here long enough to hand you the record of what was done to me. That is not a gift. That is a farewell disguised as instruction. The 30 days ran. Every one of them waited with what was coming. And when the last one ended, there was no final morning stretched into afternoon. No negotiation. The taking came again. Chapter 3. The Books of Hidden Machinery. Now look at what those books actually contained. Not comfort, not hope, not the wisdom of a man who had glimpsed paradise. Inventory, the paths of the luminaries, the storehouses of snow, rain, wind, and fire, the names and ranks of the beings assigned to govern each movement of the natural world, the mechanisms by which creation is administered from regions the human eye cannot reach. This is one of the coldest horrors buried in the entire Enochic tradition. The transformation of heaven from paradise into infrastructure, a place of overwhelming light, yes, but also of process, of hierarchy, of record, of such total administration that nothing, not a season, not a storm, not a single moment of human experience, falls outside the system. Here is what that actually means. Enoch now knows the mechanism behind what you call a storm. He knows the name of the structure that governs what you call time. He knows that the world you experience as open and unpredictable is, from a higher altitude, already entirely accounted for. How do you come back from that and call anything ordinary? How do you sit across from people who still experience the world as open and not feel the full weight of the distance between what you know and what they can know? The texts quietly answer, you cannot. Not anymore. Because heaven did not show Enoch its systems and leave him unchanged. Heaven revised him. The knowledge he carried was not a reward accumulated over a long life. It was forced inscription. A mind opened wider than it was built to go, and then filled. And the books his sons received, the pages they held in their hands, the pages they called sacred, were not gifts from a loving father. They were the documentation of a specific cost. The cost of getting close enough to something so vast and so total that a human being who touches it cannot fully return. His sons held those pages and called them wisdom. What they were holding was evidence. Evidence that their father had already been somewhere they could not follow, and that whatever came back through the door was not entirely him. Now imagine every conversation under that weight. Every glance from his children, every silence after he finishes describing another layer of the upper worlds. Still present, still speaking, yet part of him already filed somewhere else entirely. And the worst part? He knew the summons would come again. No bargaining, no delay, no appeal, just the waiting. Chapter 4. The Last Thing He Lost. The second ascent was not a return to heaven. It was the completion of a process that had begun the moment he first left the earth. The third Book of Enoch, the Merkabah text, written to document the architecture of the divine throne and everything surrounding it, does not describe what happened next in poetry. It describes it in sequence, step by step, layer by layer, with the precision of a record being filed, which is perhaps exactly what it was. The transformation did not arrive as light. It arrived as process, the human architecture, everything that made Enoch cold in winter, hungry at meals, aware of the specific weight of his children's faces, did not ascend. It was converted, stripped of what it no longer needed, rebuilt according to different specifications, reshaped by a fire that does not destroy, it reassigns, and the self, the part that knew his own name in the dark, that remembered what his wife's voice sounded like, that had once stood in front of a door about to change everything was not elevated. It was cleared away. What remained was given a designation, Metatron, not a name in the human sense, a function. The Prince of the Divine Face, the Celestial Scribe, the lesser presence that stands closest to the throne and records everything that passes before it. 70 names. A body rebuilt from light. A crown with 3 letters inscribed upon it. The Lesser God. The Talmud calls him the angel whose name mirrors the name of God. That should feel like elevation. Instead, think about what it required. To become Metatron, Enoch had to stop being Enoch. Not gradually, not through the quiet passage of years. Immediately, completely, by fire, by command. That is not transformation in the way human beings imagine it. A slow becoming. A gradual movement towards something better. That is replacement. And the question the ancient texts leave suspended, the one they never resolve, is this. Was there a moment inside the fire when Enoch understood what was happening? Was there an instant, one final instant, when the part of him that was still human, still the father of Methuselah, still the man who had once walked ordinary ground under an ordinary sky, recognized that it was not going to survive what was coming? The texts do not say, but they record the name Metatron with a reverence that does not sound like celebration. It sounds like warning. Enoch is gone. Not dead, not sleeping, not waiting in some quiet place for history to arrive at its ending. Gone. Converted. Assigned. Running inside the architecture of heaven under a different name, serving a function so close to the throne that no human category exists for what he has become. That is what the ancient tradition tells us happened to the man who walked with God. Not reward, not peace, revision. And the silence where his name used to be, the silence the book of Genesis refused to explain, is not a mystery left open for comfort. It is an answer. The world could not contain what he had become, so it stopped recording him. If this story leaves something unresolved inside you, good. It should. The texts were not written to comfort you. They were written so that you understand what it costs to get too close to something infinite. Enoch became Metatron, but Metatron does not stand alone at the throne. There are beings in that upper architecture, beings who fell from it, beings who were built to serve it, and beings whose names the ancient sources were afraid to write down at all. If you want to go deeper into that darkness, subscribe. The next one does not get easier.